Thanks for tuning into the Sheet Metal Shaping podcast, where we discuss the pursuit of sheet metal shaping education through traditional coach building techniques. My guest today on the show, all the way from Santa Ana, California, the man himself, Mr. Matt Salamanca. What's up, brother?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I'm super pumped to have you here. Fun fact for the listeners. So sometimes it's not always as super easy peasy to get somebody on the show as you guys may see it, presented online, right? So, for example, backstory here, when I try to get tagged up with Matt, I've been following his Instagram account for a while because you post good stuff, right? And your photos are really like well crafted and curated, and the detail is super high. And I was trying to get in touch with Matt, so I was like, you know what? I followed him for a bit. I'll send him a quick message. So I do. And it was like, you cannot send Matt a message. I was like, oh my gosh, who is this? This guy's like, who is this guy? Right. And I was actually in California recently, and I had met a guy by the name of Mark Scranton, and he goes, hey, you're that podcast guy, right? I said, yeah. And he goes, great. Well, let's stay in touch and all this. Long story short, between me getting to Mark getting to Matt, and then a bunch of Instagram back and forth, Matt is now here before you. So thank you so much for being on the show. I'm glad we could do this.
Yeah. And I'm glad you caught that, because I didn't even know that was off. And I was like, why isn't anybody messaging me?
That's so funny. That's so funny.
Yeah,
so man, this is amazing. I'm glad to have you here. Quick few topics before we bring you in for the show. Today we're going to cover some power hammer how-tos for sure. I know you're a power hammer guy, so I'd love to hear about that. You've got some secret projects going on back there that we'll talk about, and definitely let's talk about your journey, what you're working on, and all that stuff too. So let's kick it off. Tell the folks a bit about yourself.
My name's Matt. So I started down this path, I would say about 12 years ago, maybe or so. And I had played music in my 20s, and I did a lot of touring and like punk bands and psychobilly bands, rockabilly bands. But I had did auto body when I was young. So I bought a VW bus about 15 or so. And then I went to auto body school, working on that. And then I kind of got out of it. That's when I started playing music. So long story short, I stopped playing music. It was like, okay, I got to do something with my life besides playing. I was like looking around me, and I was like, I don't want to do this forever because they're not getting anywhere. But anyways, so I was working in an office, and I bought a 1954 shoebox, and I started working on it. And I had learned the cave and pave method of doing body work.
Cave and pave, yeah.
And yeah. And I was like, there's got to be a way to do this without using so much Bondo. And so at that point, I had a flux core welder in my garage at home that I had bought from Harbor Freight, and I had their set up body hammers, and then man, what is this called? And so I went on to the ham, and I had picked up on a word called metal finishing, and then so that just sent me down a kind of a rabbit. Because that's kind of my personality is when I get like into something, I get into it, and so I just started looking up as much information as I could, and it only being 12 years ago was still a lot different than looking it up today. Now you can look at metal finishing, and it's everywhere, as far as like your search goes. It took me to a couple boards, and then I just started reading on it and watching like little snippet videos of it, and kind of just worked on my stuff in my garage, and then worked on a couple friends' cars. Looking back, they were probably the funnest to work on because I didn't know anything. I still don't know much, but it is what it is. So it was fun to work on those. But then I started taking passion for it, and that's all I could think about. And then so the one person in my life that's always been like the most supportive is my mom. And she said, if you could find some schooling for it, why not try it? And so I was looking, there's not really much schools here in the US. There's some people that do classes, but not like schools.
Yeah.
And in Europe, you have the firms, you go apply at a firm or work your way up. But by this time I was already 30. I'm like, I'm kind of starting late. And then, or 30, 31, 32 maybe. And then from there, I went to a Ron Cobell class at Hollywood Hot Rods. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really even pay attention to the shaping aspect. I wanted to learn metal finishing. Oh. And I had tried getting in contact with Ken Sakamoto, but he was hard to get a hold of at that point. And so, I couldn't get a hold of him. And I think I finally did get a hold of him, but he said he wasn't sure about doing classes. And so that's when I went to Ron Cobell. And then I asked Ron Cobell after the class, hey, how do I make this straight? I want to make it so I don't use any Bondo.
Yeah.
And he said, you need to go to Racialing. Racialing
Ah,
knows how to do it. Yeah. And then so I looked up Racialing, and then I was like, oh, cool. He's also making stuff too. And then I booked a class with him. And I booked another class with another gentleman. Don't really want to get into that part, but I ended up going to Racialing.
mhm.
And
Ray's great. Ray's great. I know Ray
yeah,
very well. Yeah.
yeah. So that actually, I just looked at my old photos, and it was 10 years ago that I went.
Oh, no way.
January is 10 years ago. And I went there, and I knew this was going to be what I do.
Yeah.
And I liked his approach from the beginning, because I didn't have any tools, you know. And so, like the power hammers that are here,
Mhm.
they're expensive. All these tools add up, and then you need the dies. Besides all the tools, you need to put the time in.
Yeah.
And that's a huge investment, is time. And so he was just like, we need an Englishwheel, need this, need that. And I was like, okay, cool. That's simple enough. And
Mhm.
at that point, I didn't even have money for an Englishwheel from Harbor Freight, because I was like working in an office, kind of like barely above paycheck to paycheck.
Mhm.
And then this old hot rodder buddy of mine bought me a Harbor Freight Englishwheel as a gift.
Isn't it amazing how
And
the Harbor Freight Englishwheel is like the gateway drug to the industry for so many people?
yeah, it is. And I'm not a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm a student of this. And anybody really asks me like in-depth questions, I'll show them what I know. But then I always say, you need to go see these people,
Mhm.
because they're the masters of the craft. And so, yeah, I got that. And then Ray, I think I went out there the first year 2-3 times,
Yep.
I believe. And he even let me stay at his shop. I showered from a
Yeah.
hose.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I met Steve, and so I would go stay with Steve for a day, and then I would go over there to Ray's, because he lived not too far from Ray. Yeah, I slept on his couch and showered from a hose outside.
That's so funny.
Uh,
You got to do what you got
yeah,
to do, right? How do you make it
yeah.
happen? That's what it is.
So that's kind of my personality. Is even when I played music, it was like nothing else mattered. I played my
Mm.
bass.
Yeah.
And I lived from a suitcase touring with my bass and backpack and my bass rig,
Yeah.
Another part of my personality, which we'll go into later with this stuff, is like I played upright bass. So a lot of times people think slap bass or play classical with a bow. And the more I got into it, I was just thinking, there's other ways you can play this, And so then I started playing funk on it. And then I saw one video from a gentleman named Stanley Clark. He was a funk bass player,
Mhm.
but he's playing an upright bass, and it was, I think it was like a some Balboa festival or something, Newport Beach Festival. And he's playing it like a guitar. He's playing it, and that just popped in my head. Like our limits are within ourselves, are from what other people tell us. And so that kind of correlates to the way I actually do work here.
Wow.
Um,
That's cool
so
that
there's been,
that music is shaping the way that you think.
yeah, yeah. And that's kind of like who I guess who I am, because I was always kind of like a loner growing up. And then I was kind of did my own thing. Even though I like different styles and stuff, it was like punk rocker. And then years ago, I started doing pompadour and getting into old cars 20 something years ago. But it just always, I just always just, when I like something, I like it. I don't care what anybody else says. So, fast forward, I went to Ray a lot. And with
You
anybody
fly
that
out every
starts
time?
anything,
Did you
yeah.
fly? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would save my money, and wasn't making much money, because like soon after I made that, there's a term for it. It's entrepreneurship spasm or something. It's in this book I read
Hmm.
about business. But anyways, I was like, I could do this for a job. But at that point, I only wanted to do traditional customs and like chop tops and things. And I didn't even think that like I would be ever using this stuff. I would just even not even my radar, you know. And I was like, oh man, I could do this for a living, you know, and I'll just take the leap. And it's been a hard journey taking the leap because not only did I not know how to run a business, but really I was very new to all this stuff and very green. And it's a Dunning-Kruger effect. You know, I thought I knew something, and then I reached a certain point where I realized I know nothing. So, and that's like, whenever I tell people that wanted to start this, I've been asked several times, like, hey, what do you do? What do you do? And like this year alone, I calculated this because I knew we were going to have this. I calculated the days and the hours, and I think I've averaged about 80 to 100 hours a week in the shop.
Wow.
And since that day, quitting my office job, and then when I got my first shop, I lived in my shop. And that was the only way that I could possibly think about how can I achieve where I want to go. I got to be willing to sacrifice. And because I, you know, at that point I was 33, 34, and I'm like, we only get one chance at this, you know, possibly in the world. And I have very limited time. So how do I calculate time and speed it up?
Just pour everything into it.
Pour everything into it. Yeah. Be willing to sacrifice things, and then also just work my butt off, you know, and sell anything I have that was outside of this. So I mean, I still have my base.
I was going to say, did you sell the base?
I almost did at one point. I almost did, but it has so much sentimental value. I couldn't get what I wanted from it, you know. So I was like, I'll keep it. But I did sell my shoebox for it.
Yeah.
I had just moved to my first shop, and I actually sliced up my arm like from here to here, and rent was due, and so I had to work with one arm in a sling, so I would tape a dolly to my knee, and then be like hanging on the dolly, you know, because it still had to be done. I had no backup plan, and that was like that's the way I kind of figured that I'd be able to do it, is by immersion and burning the bridges.
Yeah.
And so no other options but to go. So since then, I think I've lived out of the shop for like a year only. And it's been 10 years since I actually started the business, and about 9 since I lived in my shop.
And just to clarify, the shop that you're living in is the one that you're sitting in right now.
I've actually grown several shops.
You've grown since then. Okay.
Yeah. So the first shop I had was in Garden Grove, which isn't very far from here. And it was the best I can get at the time. And I mean, there's like black mold in the shop. And then so finally, it was rough. I have videos of it, and there's like that much water inside the shop.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it doesn't rain that much here, but when it would rain, it was like that.
Yeah.
It was fun, you know.
Only aluminum car builds. That's it. Only aluminum builds. Everything else would be rusty.
I'd be out there with tarps and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was fun. You know, it's like the part that I want to like convey is the struggle is what, and the journey is what's worth it. You know, like if I look back on any projects I've done, none of them really stand out because I see all the flaws in them. But I'm happier more for the clients that came through and seeing their dreams fulfilled. But I also take joy in the struggle. I may jump around here, but sometimes I kind of bring it back all in at the end.
It's good. It's just as it's coming to mind. It's just like we're reading a book, right?
Yeah. And so the struggle, like I'm known for amongst clients I've had, where I call them up and say, I'm not happy with this, I'm cutting it out. And I'll cut it all out and redo it. And the struggle with that is that you go maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without getting paid because I'm not happy with it. And so when I look back at the projects, I can see the flaws in all of it, but I know that I gave my all. I gave above and beyond my all. And then along the way, I met some people, some friends, like you had Hark on He's an awesome guy.
Mm-hmm.
Ray, I just talked to Ray a couple of days ago. I joked with him. I was like, hey, I forgot to say, happy metal shaping Father's Day to him, because he's like the one guy that like I can call. He does a lot of Englishwheel work, and he hates the pullmax. And he knows I got stuff here, and actually, like, I have a P21, and he's the one that called me and said, hey, are you looking for a P21? So I had a P5 before, and I said, yeah. So even though we have like our different, taste in our instruments or taste in tools, we still, he's just been one of those guys.
Yeah.
And so that, like, whenever I could, I would just go back to him.
So then, as a business owner now, like, as you made that transition, how did you then define where you were at then, like at hour one? How did you define, like, okay, I'm going to make the leap, but I don't necessarily know how to run a business, what the metal shaping career is going to look like for me? How did you define that there was actually a business case to be had?
Well, so like, I'll give you an example. I wanted someone asked to approach me for doing a chop. I forgot what car it was. And they said, oh, we got a quote from another guy, and he does traditional customs. But he's not, I don't even know if he does it anymore, but he did traditional customs at that time.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, he could get one in and out for 5,000 or 6,000 or 5,000. And so I'm like, oh man. And so I chopped the car, remade window trim, remade all this stuff, not metal finished, but it's about what I consider 80%.
Yeah.
And it was like $5,000.
Right.
And so there was that part in between where it was like trying to figure out how to charge. And so then I would justify or come up with things, because the one thing that I stand firm on is the reason why I started doing auto body work when I was a kid was because I took my bus somewhere else, and they were supposed to do paint and body work on it, and they did a horrible job. They took my money. I took it to another spot. They did the same thing. And I was 15 years old, and I cleaned toilets for a living full time. So you figure like that money was
a lot of
money to me. Yeah, a lot of toilets.
Yeah.
So in doing my business, I always ask myself, can I justify this? Did I give my 100%? If I don't feel like I put my 100% into the day, then I don't charge for 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had a lower price. And I just worked like it was mine.
Yeah.
Like, how would I feel if somebody else did that to me? And so, like, I always look at a client and I think, they got a family, they got kids. If I'm doing them wrong, like, I'm taking possible new braces from their kid's mouth or something, or vacation, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and doing it that way, I have a lot of the repeat customers where I don't really need to post very much, because they tell other people and they tell other people.
Mm-hmm.
And
the word of mouth referral is amazing. Like, you ever heard of
it?
Everybody knows Warren Buffett. His ex-business partner, Charlie Munger, he's big on this thing called inverse thinking. And it's like, everybody says, how can I get this done? Well, another way to think about it would be, how would I screw this up? And just don't do that. Right. So, like, how would you screw it up for a customer, and then don't do any of those things, and they end up with this really beautiful thing that they then call you back for more work and more work and more work. And all of a sudden you're their guy because you care.
Yeah. And like, Rod Emery, Neil, his grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I still, in my brain, I have it burnt in, him working on the car on a dirt floor in his garage with a hammer, and I think it was like a tree stump, right? Or he's welding, had welding goggles on. And then a couple of years into me doing this, I got a chance to work with Rod on the Gamoon, the aluminum car. And I went up there and did a bunch of metal finishing and things to it. And like, to this day, if Rod called me today and said, I need you an hour from now, and he's like 2 hours away with traffic in LA, I'd be like, Rod, I'm coming. So, like, I've been fortunate because I've met people along the way that have invested their time in me and put their trust in me. But then also, like, or for example, that special project,
Yeah. Stuck with that.
Rod referred somebody, they referred somebody, and that car was like third or fourth referral down the line.
Hmm.
That all became from the time that I just gave it my all and went up to Rod and worked. And there was times where like I did 24-hour shifts, so he needed something
Did Rod
done.
have a hose that you could use at the shop like Ray did, or no hose?
Oh, no, I just kept on going.
Yeah.
Like there was, one time he called me up for there's some problems with some doors. This was years ago. And I said, it was like Friday, and I was like, it was like 5 o'clock or something. I was like, I'll be there in a couple hours. And I worked until they were done. And it was like 10 o'clock the next day, and so that's kind of been the process of going. And that's why I try to convey to people is, I try to look at what I do as a sport. I will never be the best at what I do. And like you hear examples of like Kobe Bryant, if he missed a shot, he would be practicing hours.
Yeah.
And so it's been frustrating. It's been times where it's like snatch the soul from me almost. So defeating. But like the fact is just keep on going. That's why I said to you is like the struggle is what I want to convey is like just don't give up.
Can you even define the best? Like how does somebody see the best? Or how would you define the best? Like the best at something for someone might be a completely different perspective than the best at that same thing from someone else. How would you define it?
So I define it as in time and speed and also quality. So like I just my buddy Eric, which actually those are his hammers. That's a whole nother story. I've been very fortunate. Eric was showing me some time cards from California metal shaping, and Red made some fenders, and he made them like in 10 hours. And I Googled one, and I'm like, how did he make those in 10 hours? And so that's what I define as the best is when your speed and your quality, because we work an hourly a lot of the times, unless we do the same project a couple of times, we kind of know. Like, if I do a Porsche insert where they delete the sunroof, I know how long it takes, but even that I try to get faster every time. And so in this business, in hourly, a lot of times people get stuck into, oh, this is just hourly, I just kind of work.
Right.
But I got clocks everywhere, and I'm always like, I wear out 3 or 4 pairs of shoes a year, and I'm constantly just faster, and higher quality. So that's how I define best. It's like, can I get you where I go in the shortest amount of time?
Nice. Is there an anxiety working by the clock that you've come to realize or come to get comfortable with, or is that just kind of just how it is?
I'm very comfortable in it. There is anxiety. It's a huge anxiety, but I just kind of got comfortable in that struggle of it. So like, because I'm also the business owner and I'm also the main guy here, even though I've had several people come through, I still have like, I got to take care of all the calls, all that stuff, and plus do the work. So it all has to fit within the day. And I think I just got comfortable in that struggle of that, trying to find ways out of things. So with the shaping, I try to find key things. Recently, I went back to Ed Scotchfield, which learned from Ray, or not Ray, he learned from Red. Back in the day, he originally went to Scott Knight's class, and then he went to saw Red with Mike Cleaves. And so he put it on a little thing. I went out there and just asked him questions to see what he does. And that's was my thing. I didn't want to shape anything. I just wanted to see.
Yeah.
And go, okay, I'm on the right path, or no, I need to go this way. Because when you first start off, everything seems so fun and so exciting, like you're shaping a panel on the hammer on the wheel, and you're seeing some kind of reaction. But then, like, how does it fit? And does it truly fit? Because like my tolerances are a lot smaller. Like I have like if it's an 1/8 inch, like I'm like it's got to be tight, and that's where I cut something out and redo it. Um, and that's just kind of the way I've operated with that stuff. And so I've talked to Hans about little things, key things. Damon Detmer, I've sent him messages like, "Hey, how'd you do that one part here and there?"
Yeah, Hans is at Pettingell for anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah.
Yep.
And hopefully one day I go out and see Mike Cleaves and just hear his story, or just maybe watch. That's all. Like, I think you get the most out of this by watching.
Yeah.
Because there's so many questions. How do you do this? How do you do that? But I fell into this myself. Is you have all this information, you're trying to bring it in, and then it's overwhelming. It's like, okay, does the speed go this way? Does it go that way with the hammer? And then next thing you know, the panel's away from you, and you just start over. So it's very, very interesting. And I read one article that Ed did. I think it's like 6 or 7 years ago. I found it online, some weird thing. And he said for this first however many years, him and his wife and the kids were very comfortable with having hardly anything. Because you got to learn. And so I said, well, here's Ed, and he's saying this. So I know that this is my path. This is my path of like so many years before I get to where I'm totally proficient. And even that, you still find ways to get better. You don't get comfortable.
Yeah. I had Luke DeLay on the show recently, and he had talked about it taking him, I think he said 10 or 15 years to get his skills to where he felt comfortable and proficient with where he wanted to be. And that's a lot of hours, right? You were talking over 8,000 hours, 8,800 hours to get your skills to where you are today. I mean, that's a lot of time. 10 to 15 years is a lot of time.
A lot of time. And he had his father and his brother, they were doing stuff.
Yeah.
On the project for jumping to Fuses, sorry, I'm going to jump that way. On Fuses, there was opportunity to work with
so many projects to talk about. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. On the project with Fuse, it was, he had made some parts for it, and then I finished him off and made some parts. I think he made some other parts. And he has a lot of years of experience in doing it. And I think one of the hardest things is in practicing craft is being able to translate it to somebody else.
Right.
And I believe that's when you start to also master a craft, is when you can teach other people. Not necessarily for money. I mean, if you choose to get money or charge, I'm fine with that, because everybody's time is valuable. But that's when somebody really starts to master it, is when you could relate to somebody else. Like being around people like Ray, and then going back and seeing Ed, and be able to seeing them relay things, and just getting those little aha moments have been the biggest things in this. It's like setting up the die and doing stuff, and the hammer, you can kind of learn stuff, but when you finally just see something, those are the moments that are like priceless.
Yeah.
It's
almost like the unofficial apprenticeship that you've had from multiple people to get you to where you are.
Yeah. And I'm still going to go. Like, if there's, if I ever make it big on TikTok, I say that as a joke, because I even thought about it. It's like, I invest all the money in my tools here, and I have like a lot of tools at the shop between myself and Eric that's has stuff here. My next goal is to gather as much money as I can together, where I go and I can spend, like, I maybe go out and see Ed again, maybe go see Mike Cleaves, and then I want to go to see Jeff Moss, Solus, and see how, like, there's so many things to learn in this. Yeah. And even though we got the power hammers in here, the Englishwheel is a beautiful instrument in shaping, and so there's just it's a lifelong journey, and trying to learn the design of it, and then and the art of shaping, but the design, and then also piecing things together so that the form of it or the shape of it also is functional in areas too.
For sure.
Because they all have to correlate when you're shaping, or when you're making something that somebody wants. They're like, hey, I want this. And, I'll give you an example of that in the back there.
Mhm.
71 CUDA. And there's not a lot of big shaping parts of it. It's a lot of small stuff. And it's like I was doing the rear trunk area. And it's like, how can I make this look really nice? Because they just want to paint it because they got all this crazy suspension. And like, how can I make this really nice? And then you also take into account, like, okay, where the bracket's going to be for the exhaust for they can hang off of. Where is the gas tank? Okay, how's that going to come out? Where is it going to breathe from? And so as I start to do stuff, that's constantly in my mind of where's the wiring going to go? When the body and paint guy gets this, it may look really awesome what I did, but is he going to be able to body work it?
Yeah.
Because everything looks really good on pictures and camera, but when you go to spray something, you really see the issues. And it's like, how much can it be floated out? Or what's my tolerances as far as body work goes?
It's very different if a piece of carpet's going over top,
Yeah.
versus
So like
it's got to be perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So in conjunction with all the metal shaping part of it, building cars, it all goes into the functionalities of, if they happen to get in an accident in this car with their family, are they going to be safe, or is it going to be on my hands?
Right.
So as I'm doing stuff, I'm constantly thinking that stuff.
Yeah.
I overthink probably everything, but that's just
No,
is what it
dude,
is.
like, I think the biggest thing to take away there is that you're conscious of your actions and whatever it is that you're doing. And you're saying, okay, like, where do we need to go with this? Let me work in reverse, right? For the wiring and, all the things that you mentioned, the safety and so forth. Plus you want to make great stuff, right? That's your name. And you want to make great stuff because at the end of the day, if you're not proud of it, who's going to be proud of it? Right. I had Bobby Walden on a recent episode from Walden Speed Shop. And he had different customers over the years that say, like, I want this level of finish. And that's what I want. His episode was a lot of fun to record because, one of the things I took from that was, what level of finish do you want? Work it to that level of finish. And sometimes he would go overboard and the customer would say, he mentioned this in the show. He goes, Bobby, I didn't want it that nice. You wanted it that nice. Right. But then the customer has to pay for that, and then that became the challenge when he was doing what he was doing with hot rods. Right. And, same thing goes for you. Like you've got a certain standard that you're sticking to. And like, this is how stuff leaves my shop. That's what you want.
Yeah, it is. And so like, and I've debated over that because like, I saw that podcast with Bobby and like, I even messaged him, like, I think a lot of stuff, what you think, like, it's awesome, because I haven't really talked to him a whole lot in person. Because like what you see on social media and what people are calling metal finish, I've seen some of it in person and it's not metal finished. And then I've also had some people come to my shop where I see their pace of working and I'm going, that was an hour job and you just took a day to do that job.
Right.
So I finally got to a point where I just kind of turned everything off because I didn't want to pay attention to what other people are doing. I mean, there's like specific people I'll go look and like, hey, how'd you do that or something, or get inspiration. But like, so they're like, the way I do it is it say I want to give a better quality. I look at it as an investment in time. I won't charge the customer and then I will go those extra hours. But before, I literally would go an extra week to give above and beyond.
Right.
And I would think of that as an investment in myself because I would learn to be better and hopefully learn from my mistakes. And I knew that eventually it'd pay off over time.
So you weren't chalking that up to billable hours. You were saying this is a skill builder, what I'm doing here.
Yeah, skill builder. Yeah.
A reputation builder. Okay.
Yeah. There was times where I had a cup of top ramen a day, because I just knew I couldn't bill that.
Right.
And I still, that's why it's just myself and I have Giovanni here because I'm keeping it within these boundaries. Because again, like I say, it's like anybody could shape something, but is that going to take 5 weeks to shape, or is it going to take a week to shape?
Right.
And how am I going to justify charging a client for 5 weeks when it should only take a week? And that is straight stealing from the client. And that's what I refuse to do. And I always try to go in when I do a project is how can I get the best I can and treat these people fairly. So in doing that, you learn a lot. You honestly do. That's just been my approach. That's why the journey, because that was the hardest part for me in the journey, was of like my truck needs new tires. How am I supposed to make this happen? Or I need food, I need rent, I have rent to pay, and I'm supposed to manage and stuff and still do the work. And if anybody's starting off or in that journey, just know that you got to get here to get there, and don't give up your values, and stand firm on your morals and character, and treat people fairly. And also devote time into learning, and be willing to throw something away.
Yeah. So how do you take those morals and estimating time and all of that stuff and apply it to a project? Like you mentioned the one over your shoulder, you mentioned the Foos Jag. Let's talk about the Foos Jag. So how did you take some of that and then say, okay, we got this cool project coming up. I'm going to take everything that I know, everything that I've learned, all of these skills, I'm going to apply it to something that I know is going to get a ton of PR because the stamp that's on it is a pretty big name.
Yeah. So with that one, I got subcontracted to go in. And honestly, that was our part where I didn't know if I could do the shop anymore because it was such a struggle.
Like do your own shop or do a sub?
Do my own shop.
Okay.
Do my own shop. Yeah, I didn't know if I could do it anymore because it was such a struggle. And of course, like, well, I'm 43. I'm going to be 44, and I'm like, I like to get married one day. I like to have kids, maybe, And so I got subcontracted to do that. And then, and that was an interesting lesson. I learned a lot on design there because Chip is an amazing artist and designer, but he's also known for giving you a sketch and you start to make stuff and you come back and go, that's not what I wanted. I want it this way. So it was like always on your toes and what do I do here? What do I do there? And then he originally gave me, like, he had 2 pictures on the wall that were sketched out, and it kind of looked a little Corvette-ish, and he even agreed at the time. And so my thing was, is how can I take this and convey it to what do I do within these boundaries? So I got these boundaries. The other one was there's a couple parts that were started by Luke, and then Chip also wanted to keep a lot of the original metal.
Yep.
For whatever reason.
On the same car that the Jag that we're talking about.
Yeah. So the rear Jag part of it, or the rear half of it. So he's like, we want to keep, this. I'm like, it'd be easier to start making new fender. He's like, no. And then the other part was didn't want to do any kind of wire forms of butts or make gauges. So it's like, okay, how do I looked at it as I got these boundaries. I got this to work with, this to work with, this to work with. And how can I let my artistic abilities come out and what I know convey what I see to what Chip sees. And so that was a very good learning process because he would say, you see this, you see that, and then we talked about the design of cars a lot more. And so like shaping the metal and the opportunity to be there was wonderful. But the biggest part that I enjoyed was learning the design and the way he sees it as an artist. And how can I apply that to my own things too?
Yeah, for sure. How much of that car did you actually shape?
The rear deck lid. I did the rear deck lid, and then the parts that were partially made, I finished those out. And then I made part of the reverses on the rear. And then from there, it was connecting it and taking a air hammer, the water bleed, and shaping the fenders, and then he'd come over and go, no, it's a little too much. And then I'd be shrinking it down.
Shrinking it back. Yeah.
What do you think about this? You know, so, and then the inner tubs, I believe. So all the inner sheet metal, I made a bunch of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I left there, a gentleman named Jesus went in and did a bunch of metal finishing to everything. Right. So there's several other parts I made while I was there.
How many hours would you say you spent on that car? Like, are we in the hundreds or are we in the thousands?
I think it was like 4 months I was there.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many hours that was.
And do you prefer working at somebody else's shop that has the equipment that you like, or do you prefer working in your own space? How do you balance that?
I prefer working in my own space. Because I have everything set to like where everything is, I know. Like if I like in the back, it's like I'll set one hammer up with one die, the other one up with another die.
Yeah.
So I set my pullmax up with something that I may need in between. You know, I try to set things up in working order, and I know where everything is.
Yeah, it's efficient for your time.
Yeah, it's efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's one thing I learned from reading a book called E-Myth.
Yeah, Michael Gerber. Good book.
Yeah, Michael Gerber. Yeah, it's a very good book. And it's talking about efficiency and stuff like that, trying to come up with ideas to communicate to everybody so that anybody can come in and have that process, right? So that's why I try to set it for myself here, is processes. So I prefer to do work here because I know everything is. And then I have all my own tools, like because they're sponsored at Fusu's. They're sponsored by, I believe, Mac Tools.
Yep.
And so, like, I have some Snap-on, I have some 3M or whatever it is.
Oh, did you get banished from the shop? You're like, get that torque wrench out of here or whatever.
Any cameras that would come in, anybody come in, take shots and film, I'd have to hide it, you know, or put stuff away in the photos. So, you know, here I have everything out. I still subcontract to other shops, or I will go over there. I do a lot of stuff with BBI every year for the Pikes Peak race. They did that pink Porsche that Kim Block was supposed to race a couple of years ago before he passed away.
Yeah.
So I'll take like the 12-inch CP over there with my Echo little hand former.
Yep.
And so I'll take that, some beater bags. I have a small metal ace Englishwheel, you know, slow bench top.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll go over there and I'll wheel out parts and, you know, do stuff like that. Awesome. So going and doing that also, I think, puts you to the test as to what you really know.
Yeah.
Because if you're only used to doing the wheel and all of a sudden someone's like, hey, here's a hammer. And it's like, oh, okay. Or, hey, we need all this done. And here's a rock and a piece of paper. It's like, how do I make this work? Yeah. So those are fun to do. I think that's like a really nice challenge.
I love that too. Do you remember Apollo 13? They were up in the spaceship and they're like running out of oxygen, or the CO2 is climbing or something. And they radio back and they're like, Houston, you know, we got a problem. And the engineers on the ground are like, okay, we got to get the CO2 to lower, but your filters or something are all messed up. So the guy pulls out like all the things in Houston that they have on the spaceship up in the, you know, in the atmosphere. And they're like, okay, we got a vacuum cleaner hose and we got a, you know, like a round filter when it should be square. And we got a roll of tape. Like, how do we make this thing work? And then, you know, out of nowhere, the engineers have come up with this concoction to get the spaceship fixed. Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I always remembered that scene because I just thought it was just so cool. The fact that, you know, people didn't have what they needed, but they knew enough to make it work. And I think if you know enough to make it work, sometimes that's what gets you by. And like in your case, if you're at a shop and you're like, oh God, all I got is a slab of granite and a twig or something, like I can make this happen. You know, that's super cool.
Make it happen.
Be resourceful.
And I think that's because like the way I started, you know, it's just make things work. When I started doing the work, I didn't have a stomp shear. So if there's projects where I'd have to make some rockers or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't cut a straight line on a stomp shear. Mm-hmm. So I would hand shear the whole thing and then file it straight and go, okay, well, it only takes 10 seconds to stomp shear something. Yeah. So that hour of me making the straight, I can't charge for.
Yeah.
You know, so that was like some of the things that was that helped me to really understand, like, you can make anything work. Really, you know, the power hammers are really super nice. They're very costly, and just buying one doesn't mean that you can shape anything, because you can't just throw a piece of metal and it pops out.
Right. It doesn't just do it itself.
So that's like with anything we do here, and so learning the basics and being resourceful. I also went to a Gene Winfield class when I started.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, every day is a school day, and he was making something, and he's like, I used the pipe for this, use the pipe for that. It wasn't metal finish, but he still made it work for what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
isn't he known for the pipe anvil? Those 3 pipes welded together with the slit in the middle.
Yeah, with the break, it works really well.
It does.
And I still have some stuff like that in my shop that I use.
Sometimes just the crude get it done method just is what you need. And that's it.
Yeah, you just need to beat it sometimes. Because I fell into a trap for a while. It was like every part of the process had to look perfect. So if I did this by hand, it was like, oh, really nice and perfect. And you go to the next part, and then you realize sometimes, like, hey, all this stuff is to get messed up, and then in between, like, you can bring it all together at the end.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff really helps me when I go into places. If I end up going to places,
What's the story of the power hammers behind you? You'd mentioned a friend of yours. So there's some kind of a back history there.
Yeah, my buddy Eric Sticka. He's my best friend. I just got through making my power hammer that I had, the brother ones. And I wanted to get a pettingell, but then there were some things at the time, and so I ended up getting the Midler, and I built that. And then we were talking a lot because he's not too far from here, and he'd come over to the shop and hang out, or I'd go over to his dad's place, and he had said, like, hey, like, I see how hard you're working, like, if you ever need to use this stuff, just let me know.
Right. And
it's a really big ask to say, like, hey, can I use it? And then I think it took me about a month to work up the courage to ask, because it's like, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's this one here, but this is the last one that was made. This was made for Bell helicopters, I believe it was. So that's why it has a tall anvil. And it's actually a foot taller than normal. Yeah.
Nice. So if you're tall, I mean, that would be of benefit.
Yeah. Well, I have a huge platform.
So I guess if you're small, it's the exact opposite of what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a monster. So it's a great hammer.
Because that's a big deal. I mean, to give somebody your super expensive piece of equipment, whatever it is, right? It doesn't have to be a hammer, just anything. Also, too, like the thought behind it, saying, you know what, I've got this thing, and then you mentioned, I see how hard you're working. I've got this thing. I'd like to share it with you too. I hope it does well, right? Like that's a really kind gesture.
Oh, it's huge. And so, like, and at the times of me wanting to quit, there was only a few things that kept me going, because it is a hard business.
Yep.
And when you're learning and trying to do it all, and it's always been my mom and Eric.
Yeah. So, that's really cool. And they're both his.
Yeah. Yoder since, well, he has a number 1, and also another number 2, but the 33 inch. And then
and how did these? I was going to say, how did these end up in your shop? He's just like,
you had to get them transported, so we had to transport them. Again, and so he worked over the years for an aircraft company, and he he had 401k, or however he saved his money. It's hard-working money.
Yeah.
Find them for a good deal, purchase them.
Yeah.
But definitely destroy something very quickly.
Yeah. No. Well, that's the thing. Like, you can have all the best stuff, right? You can have the newest. You can have the most vintage. You can have the most expensive. You can have the most inexpensive. It kind of doesn't matter. Like, if you don't know how to use it, it's irrelevant. It's all irrelevant.
Yeah, it is. But they also, I remember I was talking to Hans about doing this reverse curve in the hammer, and I've done them in the Englishwheel, and there were no problem for me to do an Englishwheel, like long reverse. And I was using radius dies in the hammers, and then I switched over to using flats. And for some reason, something wasn't clicking in my brain and how to do this. And I messaged him a few times about it. He would tell me some things. And I think I did that same panel, let me see, 48 times. And each one of them was about 6 to 7 hours, working on it. Yeah. So you can make a lot of trash very quickly.
No doubt. Yeah. Holy smokes. That's a long time.
Yeah. Because I'm not like, I don't think I'm talented in doing this stuff. I won't quit. I just refuse to quit. I can't quit. Yeah. There's nothing else for me to do. This is what I'm meant to do.
Well, you don't want to throw away those 8,800 hours, right? You're like, I'm in here, baby. That's it.
Yeah, no, yeah. I calculated it one time. So in the last 10 years, because I've averaged almost 7 days a week for the last 10 years. Yeah. Very few trips. The only trips I've gone on was actually for metalworking stuff. I think I've probably put in about 20 years worth of time, or 20 to 30, something like that. Because there was times where I would work 72 hours straight, no breaks, and then go to sleep and then wake up and do another 8-hour day or 10-hour day.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of time and making a lot of mistakes and fixing them, Yeah.
And that project you have behind you, what's going on there?
Yeah. So that particular car, it's going to be something that they want to possibly produce. So what they're doing is taking all modern Porsche stuff. They've taken the original design of the 550, beefed it up, did a few things, made it longer, and then are going to put it on the modern chassis. And then they have a few people that are interested in buying them. So at that point, they'll decide whether or not they're going to produce them.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's a super fun project. Let's see. I'll try.
Is that for Rod Emery or?
So it's for a company that makes like high performance parts for Porsches.
Nice.
The gentleman's name's Greg, and the buck is a soft foam buck that was CNC milled with a thin layer of epoxy on it. It's not really hammer form because you can't hammer form on it because every time you hit, there's a small indentation. So when you get to the end of something, it's completely different.
Right.
So it'd been nice for it to be hammer form, but it's not. And so it's a project that's been in here. It was in the works like 4 years ago. He contacted me. And we finally got it in, I think like 2 years ago. And then I started chipping away at it. And then he put it on hold for a little bit. And actually I'm supposed to start back up on it now. Yeah.
Dude, that's wicked.
Full aluminum.
Just the back end of it looks beautiful. I mean, gosh.
Yeah. It's a very nice looking car.
Yeah. I like that they lengthened it because the original Porsche, like all the 356s and the original, they're small cars. And like as people grow, those cars stay put. Like they don't change, right? Yeah. So it's nice to add a few extra inches for some wiggle room.
Yeah, and then the motor, it's a pretty gnarly motor. So it's going to be a very, very like supercar style car, but with that vintage twist. They didn't want to do a tribute, so they're trying to come at it as like approach of like if it was done today, how would it be done? But still keep that craftsman style aspect of making a body.
That's really cool. I always like for the people that are into like, the 50s resto mods and things like this, you've got that old world look, but then you've got, the modern technology. So the thing starts every time and you can drive it across the country and it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Right. But, it's that beautiful baileigh or it's some other coachbuilt car. The same thing goes for this. It's got that flavor of what somebody likes with the modern tech.
Modern tech. Yeah. And then the CUDA that's back there.
Yeah.
That's going to have a twin turbo Nelson motor, and it has all speed tech, this crazy chassis from speed tech. Like through the rear, you can see like I'm not a motor guy. So
I'll just build the bodies, man. I don't know.
I just build the bodies. I'll put the motor in and I won't fire it up though. But I do like that aspect of it. But I'm also a traditionalist, so I also like flatheads.
Right.
But I like to blend them sometimes. It's the purpose. What's the purpose of it? So the purpose is, say for this Porsche, is to do something like a modern take on it. I think that's a wonderful thing to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very cool. So when do you expect to have that done? Like how many hours would go into? You're effectively, that's a coachbuilt car. I mean, that's where you can ground.
I I've done stuff for and helps other people do full ones. And so like with this one, I contacted Hans because they do several 550s. And I asked him like, hey, what's your roundabout time on that? And then I called Ray up and I said, hey, what would you think? So they gave me some hours, and it being not a full restoration type thing, because I don't have to make all the infrastructure part of it. I have to make an infrastructure, but not like an actual real one. I get to design my own stuff. Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit different. So with that one, Gray's got enough trust in me that it's like, hey, this is what I did.
Yeah.
And there's times like where I called him up and said, hey, this week there's no charge because I don't like the part I made. So
yeah,
I'm going to redo it. So
yeah. Well, you know what? I mean, to have the opportunity to scratch build something of this character is like, that's amazing. Just to say, one day when that thing rolls down the road, you can be like, I built that thing. Right?
It's super amazing, super awesome. Then let me see, right above it, right. I'm trying to point my finger there. Right back there, there's a buck.
Looks like an IndyCar or something. What is that?
Yeah, it was IndyCar. It's supposed to be like a newer take on the Gurney Eagle. So I did that one, and that one actually makes me really happy because whenever I see him on social media, if I ever go on, he drives it on the road.
Oh, no way.
So his IG is Discommon, and he's a designer. And there's like pictures of him with pizzas driving down the road with pizza boxes and stuff. And I just think that's super cool that he had a full built car. I did the body and attached the body to it, but he built this car, and he also had Joe Scarbo build all the rest of it. And he literally drives it in the snow, and in the snow, he's back in Carolinas. Yeah, it's super cool. So that makes me happy when I see that car, because it's like he's out there enjoying it. It's not just a show car.
Is this a rare breed? So when you stand back, or if you zoom out and look at the industry as a whole, and you say, okay, the coach building craft, is the way that you see it, how it is today. Are these types of builds disappearing? Are they becoming more prevalent? Like, where do you see the industry headed with stuff like this?
I think it's going to last. But I think so. There's a lot of. I'm not opposed to new technology. I TIG weld. I won't flame weld unless I'm doing a specific restoration for that.
Right.
So to even do my aluminum, I TIG weld it. And so there's a place for technology, and there's a place to know the history and be able to do things. And so I do believe that this industry is going to keep on going. It's going to get smaller. And one of the things that I follow a lot what's going on in the world, because also that affects me. Like when COVID happened and all that stuff shut down in the beginning, I had a client with 9 cars to do, and I had one of his 964s in here, an RSR, and it's like a $3 million car, and I was doing the restoration, the metalwork for it, and he had 9 more cars or whatever. He was pretty well off, and he cut everything.
Wow.
And it's because a lot of his investments were in realty and apartments and stuff. And so everybody shut down, and so he's like, hey, I gotta take this step back. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm always trying to watch and see, and, talking with Ray and things is, I think there'll always be a place for it, but it's going to get smaller, and that's okay. Because what I think is going to happen in the industry is going to be weeding out process. When I say that, it's like, I believe in some years to come, it's going to get harder and harder to do this stuff, because how are people going to justify a hand build versus having something pressed with that one machine? I forget the name of it. Or there's another place, Machina Labs in LA. Eventually the quality will get better, so you can be able to make things better. So how are people going to justify doing it by hand? And so not everybody's going to do it. Yeah. And that's why I think that there's going to be kind of a bit of a weeding out process, because it's financially, it's a smart thing to do to keep on doing this. And for a lot of people, it won't be.
Do you see that in the projects that you take on, just in terms of economics? Like if you're building a Model A, I mean, when you can go out and buy a restored Model A for relatively low money compared to something, some 1950s Ferrari or something that's just unattainable. I mean, the act of building the fender on the early Fords versus the act of building or restoring a Ferrari, the end values are very different, but the skills required and the act of doing so might be very similar, right? Do you see that in a lot of your projects where they have to be of a certain dollar value or a certain caliber in order to actually make ends meet, or to have a car that's more valuable versus what you put in?
It's I've asked clients before, is this something you really want? I'm not going to force them to do something they don't want. Now, if there's times where they're like, hey, this is what I got, I'm like, and again, this is the way my brain works. It's like, okay, here's my boundaries.
Yeah.
How can I get this done? And then I contact the body guy in paint, say, hey, what do you need me to do? Because we need to do this. But the one problem I'm seeing is when a client's looking online and people will post, oh, I did this in 5 hours, or I did this in a day, and I know full well it didn't take that long, then they're thinking that's the quality they're going to get out of me for 4 or 5 hours, or 3 days, or 2 days.
It's a perspective, yeah.
It's a perspectives, yeah. And so I will say in the industry, what's going to happen is I think something like that is going to happen.
Right.
But there's always going to be people with money. But it doesn't mean that we can't take more money from them, because I have a saying, is I don't have a rich man tax. I don't tax rich people.
Sure.
You know, somebody comes in and they have $500 to spend, they get the same quality as a person, or I try to get the same quality at least, because there has to be some kind of like, I can't give myself fully away for that, but I still try to make the best I can for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the industry, I've had to repair a lot of people's work where I've seen things come in and I'm just like, okay, what can I do? You know, I don't put anything online or anything like that, because I've been in situations where, like, I'm sure someone's repaired my work at one point, you know, but in the industry, it's going to be different. But there's always people with money. And I'll give you examples. One of my clients, they have cars that come in, and they have their own security team.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they have to come in within certain hours, like in the middle of the night at certain times, and they have their own security teams. And yeah. And so like that client will have one of their clients send his private jet, pick her up and take her places to work on a car.
Wow.
So there's always going to be people that love cars.
Yeah.
You know, as far as what the governments choose to do, I'm not quite sure. But people are always going to be doing it. And that's why, like, my goal is how can I get better and how can I get faster? Like, if I shape this in, 5 hours, I always look at it and go, where could I save time? Could I have done this? Could I have done that? Like when I make pullmax dies, because I don't make them perfect. I make them to get me what I need done. Yeah,
because it could be a one-time use.
Yeah, it could be one-time use. So if I spend a day making a pullmax die or something like that, it's like I got to charge for that, or I don't charge for it. So it's like, okay, I'll look at things going, okay, this is what I need to get done. And then so at the end of every project that leaves, it's like, where could I save time and save the customer?
Yeah, for sure. Man, this has been such a cool episode. Like I think
I haven't said anything about the hammer yet. Sorry.
No, dude, you know what? I think it's really cool. We did touch on it with your friend Eric and how he's been so gracious to lend it to you. But I mean, like I think what we've actually ended up here with is we've taken like a behind the scenes snapshot of what's taking place in the industry. And this is some of the real raw visceral stuff that a lot of people don't talk about. That's really important. Right. Yeah. And the fact that you've come up the ranks, you've come from, we'll call it, ground zero, you musician transition into metal and use that to help shape your perspectives. I think that's amazing. And the fact that you're so grounded in your thought process, and also like with your mom and family, and like all of these things are helping to make you a better business person, to keep your honesty and integrity in check. And I mean, I don't know firsthand, but I can suspect just based on this conversation that your customers probably feel the same way. So, from me to you, thank you so much for being on the show. Like, dude, super cool.
Thank you.
Where can people?
If anybody, oh, sorry. I was going to say this one thing. If anybody has any questions, I'm not really good at always responding because I don't try to get on my phone that much.
You can get them on Instagram now. You can get them on Instagram. The messages will blow through. They'll come through to them.
with a hammer or with any of these things.
Yeah.
I'm not a teacher. I just tell you what I know. And then I could point you to the people that you need to learn from.
Yeah. Very cool, man. How can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Instagram, I think it's Salamanca Metalcraft. And then email salamancametalcraft@gmail.com. And then just send me a text message or a phone call or something, and I'll do my best to get back.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thanks for tuning into the Sheet Metal Shaping podcast. Matt Salamanca. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe, and we will see you guys on the next episode.